Welcome to the Monday, November 23rd edition of Track Announcer's Notebook. Pat Gonzalez along with Stuart and Odell. Great to have a good group on hand tonight as we delved in a little bit more to the CSBK 2021 schedule that was just released yesterday. We have Colin Fraser with us to talk all things CSBK, and we'll get into that. But first up, as always on the show, Nodell's notes. Stuart, MotoGP finally put a cap on what was a very eventful 2020 season.
Yeah, that's right, Pat. It was a great weekend in Portugal. The track looked spectacular, and I think all the riders had said what a great time they had riding around it. No matter how good or bad their result was going to be, they all had a great time riding that track. Miguel Oliveira won on the Tech 3 KTM. So that was his second win of the year, and he took the pole, and he was in his home country. So it is too bad there wasn't fans there, because I'm pretty confident it would have been a pretty intense event with all the fans cheering and going crazy for their hometown favorite.
Yeah, he qualified on pole. Evidently, he's got a lot of experience on that racetrack. Actually, as we discussed on last week's show, I did get a chance to visit there. Last year, didn't get inside, but it is a pretty amazing facility, only about 12 years old. And my guess is that MotoGP will look to go back there. I know World Superbike has raced there before, but was a great way to cap off the season. And, we'll see 2021 does have the race at Circuit of the Americas in Austin, Texas. I think it's April the 18th. Hopefully the border will be open, and for Canadian race fans, they'll be able to at least travel to that one. But like with most schedules, as we'll announce or go over tonight, they're written, they're published, but I think every motorsport schedule is subject to change depending on where this long and winding road of COVID-19 takes us next year.
Yeah, I agree, Pat. There's so many unknowns at this point, but also in Portugal, they did crown the Moto2 and Moto3 champions, and Enea Bastianini won on the Italtrans Moto2 bike, and that's going to be the ride that Joe Roberts is going to fill in for next. So that was good for that team. So Joe Roberts is definitely the American rider, is going to an established organization, and then Albert Arenas on the KTM won the Moto3 race. So it was 3 races, always exciting. Although the winner actually won by about 8 or 9 seconds.
I think a day-long weekend, so you'll have a chance to get back to some stuff on the Monday. So a bit of a travel day, and then the traditional middle of August weekend at Canadian Tire Motorsport Park on the 14th and 15th of August. So a total of 4 events, Superbike doubleheaders, giving us 8 races. And on the release, there was an indication that they're looking at adding a 5th event, either at the start or at the end of the season. Where that will be, one of the things we want to get into with Colin Fraser. And that race could be a variety of different racetracks where a 5th event could take place. Stuart, I think you put together not only the CSBK schedule, but also taking a look at all the regional schedules, the new Pro 6 Cycle GP Series at Calabogie, the Super Series at Shannonville, as well as the SOAR Series at Grand Bend Motorplex. And there are some conflicts, which we'll highlight here is up on the screen. We share with you the 4 schedules. So Stuart, I know you spent some time earlier today. There you see the CSBK series as I outlined it. The conflicts that exist, obviously the 3rd round on July 10th and 11th of the Super Series conflicts with the CSBK National, and round 2 of the Pro 6 Cycle GP Series at Calabogie. I know that's one of the conflicts, and I believe there is a couple of others a little bit later on. I think regional Round 3 at Calabogie conflicts with one of the rounds at round 3 at Grand Bend Motorplex. But just taking a look at geographically where those two series are, Sword tends to attract a lot of riders sort of Toronto West, and the Calabogie series, I think, is sort of going to be more Toronto East, and of course, a very, very strong Quebec contingent. So if you're a motorcycle road racer, there's certainly no shortage of races that you can run in 2021. Stuart, any luck with getting Mr. Fraser back on board?
No, he's
Confirmed for next season. There's the entire Noche family. And that fifth
Actually,
race.
we're missing one Noche, I have to point
All
out.
right. Okay.
She's
They want
Also
to
a
say
dog.
hi.
Right. Okay. There's everybody. And bedtime's coming up soon.
Okay.
Colin, that fifth race that was mentioned in the press release, Sheena talked about possibly being Calabogie, but what are the other considerations in terms of where that might be?
Really, the challenge right now is having any confidence in what's going to happen next summer, because nobody knows. And a national series is a complicated thing to conduct. So I think that, right now we're looking at a few options in terms of the fifth round. And of course, the goal is to have more superbike races than we've had previously. And Calabogie, a return to Calabogie, a second Calabogie round is definitely a possibility. But it is true what Sheena said earlier, that one of our concerns is we aren't going to make it out to AMP because depending on what's going on with the virus, we still have perhaps a bubble issue out there, because technically we haven't been able to go there, period, during this whole time since the coronavirus arrived. So there's a lot of balls in the air, and I think we aren't going to be certain of a schedule until April, May, and that's if everything goes well health-wise. And my expertise is not health and safety in terms of the nation or the world, so it's tricky. There's going to probably be a change or two. Hopefully, no cancellations.
Okay, so this schedule is sort of a work in progress, and you're hoping to get the 5 races, but if you can't go to AMP, and hopefully you can, but if you can't, you've got backups to hopefully get to an absolute minimum of 8 and hopefully 10 superbike races.
Yeah, obviously we had 4 superbike races to determine a title this year, and we've had years with less, but not in a long time. It is ironic, in our 40th anniversary, we end up having a lot less racing than we typically do. So it would be nice to get back to at least a full schedule. And also, there's always been a certain amount of pressure from the top pros that they'd like more races, because it makes for a more fair series, if you will, because if you have mechanical or a technical or a crash or an issue of some sort, you're better able to dig your way out if there's a few more races. So I think that that's attractive. Also, the world is gradually heading towards pretty much all double headers. A lot of series are doing that now, obviously not MotoGP, but just about everybody else. And I mean, in the UK, which arguably is the strongest national series in the world, they had a day with 3 national superbike races in one day. I certainly don't have that as a goal, but things are definitely changing.
What about the other classes? Are we looking at double headers in any of the other support classes, or are they all going to be single final races on the weekends?
Well, I think we'll have to see. It's what time and scheduling permits. When you're not running a spectator event, that means, for lack of a less complicated way to put it, it's a track rental, which means our ability to conduct the event is restricted, that we are on a strict time curfew and we can't just do as we please, which, that's one of the nice things about running a national. If you need a little bit of time here and there, usually it can be fairly easily achieved, because the spectators are arguably your biggest concern, the fans in the stands, as they like to say. But when you're doing a track rental and it's a compressed schedule, it gets a lot harder to do that. And that's why in 2020, we only crowned a champion in the one class, because I don't think 1 or 2 races is enough to constitute a title. Now, who knows what next year will be like? But we're hoping to get back to a minimum of 5 or 6. You know, typically Pro Sport Bike would have double headers. Typically every lightweight race forever has been double headers. So we'll see what's possible. You know, the entries in 2020 with the limited schedule we ran were probably a little better than we expected. So that's an encouraging sign. And obviously we'll all be seeing in the spring if the turnout is similar to what we saw in the second half of 2020.
So let's go through the 4 races that are on the schedule right now and what the schedule might look like. And at this point, looking into your crystal ball, with or without fans. So you're going to kick it off at Grand Bend Motorplex, unless that late May race materializes. Is Grand Bend the middle of June right now? What's the chances of race fans, even if that number's restricted to a certain amount?
I think based on what's happened with SOAR in Grand Bend, we'll probably have a selection of fans. I don't think we'll be able to open it right up. Everyone's prepared to do it that way. Of course, we got to be realistic. Everybody tends to think in best case scenario. And I think that's where we're at in terms of the virus and all the possibilities in terms of inoculation. But best case scenario is exactly that. And it doesn't frequently play out that way. So the press release was quite accurate in terms of how we're looking at it. We're anticipating building a program that we can run with no fans at all next year. That doesn't mean that's what we want to do. And for sure, Grand Bend, since they've had a small number of fans at the SOAR regionals, suggests that we'll be able to have some fans there. But I'm not counting on fans anywhere, period. And that's partly because, you know, the model changes so much when you have spectators, and it changes for the better in a number of respects, most of them to do with money and how you spend that money. So it would be nice to go back, but right now that seems to me wholly unrealistic. And Shubenacadie at the end of July, that to me is our best case scenario.
Okay.
For spectators.
So looking at the second round in conjunction with Sandy and Sheena Noche's Pro 6 Cycle GP Series. I assume that that's going to be a very, very busy race schedule where you're running all of your CSBK classes as well as Sandy's regional classes. Have you, at this point, even looked at what a provisional schedule might look like for that weekend?
No, and actually, because of the way that the national and regional classes will play out, we've been through this scenario lots of times at lots of different tracks where, for lack of a nicer way to put it, we extrapolate the regional results out of the nationals. We've done it from Westwood to Calgary to AMP to all over the place. Sometimes back in the old days, because when contingency was offered, they had to have enough events to be able to claim that contingency for the regional guys. So we talk to the manufacturers and see if we could double score those races. So if you imagine if your bike's legal for both classes, that the rules are essentially the same. We at Calabogie in July have a amateur lightweight sport bike race, and it counts for points towards the national amateur sports bike and also the regional. So it's overlapping. It doesn't require 2 races. And of course, Calabogie is a complicated place to run events, just like CTMP. It's a blind track, so it's not a good place to rush a schedule. It's impossible to rush a schedule. We tried, it didn't go particularly well. So we're going to be really careful about that. And the realities of the big tracks like CTMP or Road Atlanta or Laguna or any Daytona, any of those tracks that are big and hard to run, is trying to rush a schedule is just disastrous, and it just winds up with everybody being upset.
So Colin, looking at Canadian Tire Motorsport Park, of course, right now in Ontario, if this was the conditions were under next spring, you couldn't have any spectators there at all. You're going in there essentially as a track rental situation, similar to what you did this past August, and did all the television shows out of there and actually put on some really great racing. Assuming, and this is a big assumption, that Miles Brandt can sell tickets and have spectators there, even if that's maybe limited to 5 or 10,000. Is it set up where you can convert over to what has been the traditional weekend there with practice, qualifying on Friday, and then doubleheaders on Saturday and Sunday? Is that a plan B that you could revert to?
Well, I suppose it's really plan A because it's what everyone would prefer. It's easier and less risky for Pro 6 and CSBK. And, we're pretty much linked together in all of this. When you're talking about Calabogie, if everything works out at Grand Bend, the Friday will be run by Pro 6. It'll be one of their track days. So we're running in parallel pretty much everywhere now because that's a model that I'm not saying is lucrative, but it probably can typically break even. And that's kind of the situation we're in until the spectators come back to try and keep the series running. So at CTMP, I think the management there would prefer to have spectators, and they're structured to do that. They're allowed to have 5 big spectator events a year, and that gives us a lot more freedom in terms of schedule and risk of staging the event, that nobody's worried, Pro 6 or CSBK, that we can't afford to do it. It was a big gamble. It was a gamble even to have them accept that we were capable of conducting the event safely. And of course, one of the things we were fortunate about is we went to Calabogie first, and Pro 6 had been running days there, and the venue there were pretty structured in terms of COVID requirements. So that gave us the ability to prove to CTMP that we were relatively able to run that event. And even some of the things like, we encouraged everybody to run out of the hot pit and you just wore your masks all the time. So it's really a different model, and the need to be in the paddock is much less because you're not entertaining 30,000 people who are marching around the track all day long looking for interesting things to do. And it's, at Calabogie, because it's not a great spectator venue, Calabogie felt like any national at Calabogie, but CTMP with no spectators seemed really strange.
Okay. I know we've got a few questions there, so I'm going to go to Stuart and Odell. And again, if you have joined us tonight on Track Announcer's Notebook, feel free to jump into the Q&A. If you've got a question, a comment for Colin Fraser, put it there and we'll address it here this evening. Stuart, what have we got in the Q&A so far?
Yeah, thanks, Pat. First, I want to thank Colin for coming on and also congratulate him. I know he would have been in charge of a pretty difficult situation in this past year, and it seems from everybody we've had on the show, as far as racers go, they all really appreciated the effort and they thought the racing ran really smooth. So I think he did a job well done and should be acknowledged for that. Some of the questions we have is Michael's commented, what are the thoughts for the pro entries for next year? If they have a sense of what the numbers will be like, and if they said that, they've noticed some pro riders were absent this year, and obviously some of those reasons would have been COVID related. We know some riders announced before the season really started that they weren't going to participate.
Yeah, it's obviously, if you're throwing a party, you'd like everybody to come if you possibly can. And if you throw a party and not everyone comes, the best solution is to throw the best party and have everybody there be happy that they went. And then hopefully some of the people who could make it decide to come to the next one. And I certainly don't ever want to get into a public debate ever with pro racers. They're our best spokespeople. They're the people we rely on to send the clear message about what it is we're up to. I think given that we were missing a few racers in 2020, we were fortunate how things played out. The weather, it's funny, it's not the greatest thing to be a spectator or a racer, but in terms of television and entertainment, wet weather is a tremendous leveler and makes for a lot of interesting things. So the pro entries, I think overall were pretty good in 2020. When you look at the results of the races, the entries don't look as strong because there are a lot more retirements when you're running as many races as close together. And of course, we do depend to some degree on the middleweight guys. And we had a huge turnout of middleweights, most of them French Canadian. And that was a bit of a surprise. In fact, and probably Sandy and Sheena have touched on this, we had more French Canadian participation than we've ever had even in races in Quebec by percentage. And Calabogie and our new emphasis on Calabogie is partly because of COVID and partly because the French Canadian racers view that place as a home track for them. So obviously it's not in Quebec, it's not ideal, but it's relatively close. And we get a tremendous turnout with those guys. And of course they have their own kind of leader of the group was Sebastien Tremblay, who is one of the top pro sport bike racers in the Liqui Moly class. So there's a lot of things going on there in terms of entry. The entry wasn't fantastic, but it was probably better than we expected in 2020. So we're hopeful that everybody comes back. But of course, when I started off talking about not being able to predict where we are with health and safety and what the government guidelines are and what's possible with travel province to province, we could get to May and suddenly all kinds of new things occur and racers make decisions based on the same things that they made decisions on in 2020. And don't forget, when a lot of this debate was going on in late June and early July, we weren't sure we were allowed to do anything. And honestly, for me, the ambition of the Canadian National Motocross Series, who started off by announcing a couple of dates and were pushing hard with the manufacturers, kind of helped convince me, and talking to Sandy and Sheena with Pro 6's support, that we should try. And when we decided to try, we didn't know if we'd succeed. We didn't know if it would work, and we weren't sure about CTMP until we'd had Calabogie. And after we had CTMP, we really debated about maybe doing a third event. So yeah, it's not ideal. I'm used to making decisions in the winter, not making decisions 2 or 3 weeks ahead, and then you have to clear it with so many people, and you're stepping on a lot of toes and other schedules, and other people don't wish to be embarrassed because a lot of series didn't run at all in the world of professional national type racing. I think at CTMP this year, we were the only series that provided any TV from the venue, period. So it's a bit of a strange situation, and I think we all believe we have a better understanding going into 2021. But when you look at MotoGP or World Superbike or Formula One or any big schedule, there's an immense amount of optimism that those dates can happen. And I'm skeptical, and I think that I like to think we're in a better position of offering those events for real than some of the other series are. But even you look at Moto America, when they went west in the late part of the series, they didn't have spectators there, and most of the American venues, even in June, did have fans. So it's a strange situation. Like, certainly explaining it to Americans, they are surprised that we're still in this unlikely to have fans situation.
Yeah, Stuart, and I think we may have a couple of more questions or comments there for Colin. Why don't you just go through all those?
Okay, I'll fire away then. Let me just go through here in the sequence I was in. Just bear with me a second here. One of the other questions was, is there any concern with respect to the cost in the lightweight class, as there's a horsepower limit increase being anticipated for 2021?
So in terms of anything to do with rules, anytime you change the rules, even if you're trying to save money, short term, it usually costs money. Last year, we announced some adjustments. Obviously, we didn't have very many amateur lightweight races in 2020. We announced a new class, which you could call a bump class, which was going to be a pro-am with more liberal rules. We've never actually conducted a race to those rules yet because we didn't stage any of those races in 2020. So it certainly isn't a goal to make any more changes to lightweight or the associated classes until we start running the things we promised to run almost a year ago. And lightweight obviously is an emphasis. It's important to the manufacturers. It's a growth class. I think in terms of the regional series, Pro 6 GP at Calabogie, we're going to want to make sure that it's a good destination for the lightweight guys. So I'm not sure there's going to be very, very much in the way of changes to lightweight, and preferably next to nothing or nothing.
Sounds good. The next question is, I guess, along the lines of the amateur racing, do you anticipate having any television coverage for some of those amateur classes?
So the question is a complex one. We've never had coverage any major way of an amateur class. Way back in the early days of TSN, we did have a highlight pack that'd be 3.5 minutes long when we had the Brett McCormick era. His races were televised when he was an amateur, when he was 14 years old. We couldn't even have him racing at 14 right now. So the goal is always to provide more. It's just the reality. You can't budget and plan to have that much material on TSN. They won't accept that much. We can't just keep giving them races. You have to negotiate. And the reality of the television crew and the timing and getting everything set up, and obviously doing more is better for more people. So far, we've concentrated on the pro classes because they have worked their way up, and those are the names that we're most trying to promote. So ideally, we'd shoot everything always, and it would all be live. that would be the goal in the long run. Do I see that as possible in the near future? Absolutely not. It's a struggle to get where we are. We had a pretty good year that just completed with TSN because we managed to do some things when a lot of people didn't. So that's got us a little equity, and how we invest in that, because the world of media and television and broadcast and video and whatever you want to call it is changing. So I can't tell you with authority, but I think situation may get better and we'll be able to do more. I don't think short term we'll be able to shoot all the classes, and definitely amateur lightweight is a class that we would push to the forefront if we had a little more room to broadcast.
Next question, Stuart. Rapid fire here.
Okay, yeah, I guess the next question would be, any thoughts or opinions on increasing the safety barriers at places like CTMP with regard to whether it's the air fence or the bottle bags that people have talked about?
So that's always a challenge, and obviously there were some issues at CTMP. I think you spoke to Jeff Williams fairly recently, and that happened at a track day. So unfortunately, I wasn't there for that event. I went and looked, and I have a pretty good notion of what happened, but we definitely had more issues in turn 4 than we have had. It's always been a challenge, turn 4 at CTMP. So we're going to have to reevaluate and do more there, because the reality is when you have new problems, you have to figure out. I couldn't tell you with certainty why suddenly that we had new challenges in that area of the track, but there were enough incidents that it's a new problem. So there's always going to be changes. We're going to have to do more. Some venues don't want to deal with bottle bags. Some venues suit the air fence better. Some are hay bale. It depends. You know, a place like Grand Bend is nice because it doesn't require much. There's very little to hit, so that's really a nice situation to be in, but that's not realistic for most of the venues. AMP has been a bottle bag track, was the first really serious bottle bag track, and that's been great for them. And in their particular part of the world, the auto racers get along with the bottle bags, but at some venues they won't run the event for cars, which means you've got to move them, and then that makes things complicated or expensive, or frequently just dumps the whole problem right back on us. So yeah, there's no quick answer, but I think to speak specifically to CTMP, we will be making some changes there. That's going to be necessary based on how the event played out in 2020.
Cool. I guess going back to the media side of things, Colin, and I've noticed you guys do it as well with, you know, YouTube channels, and we've done it here with the Track Announcer's Notebook, and control, I guess, having so much content and then being able to disseminate that so many different people can get it, and, you know, creating, you know, having the athletes be the stars and raising their profile. Are you finding more avenues or more opportunities through those kinds of platforms in order to raise the profile of the sport? And then also because with the pandemic, it seems like motorsports could really have an opportunity here. The power sports industry is booming, and maybe coming out of this, when people can go and do things, you know, maybe people are going to be more willing to just go and be outdoors and go camping with their family for the weekend, and maybe have it at a racing type of event.
Everyone's trying to figure out how this is going to play out for the rest of the pandemic, and then what it looks like afterwards. And it's, in my opinion, it's almost all guesswork. There's a lot of opportunity. I think that the motorcycle industry, as much as there have been a lot of encouraging signs, by no means is there a stampede of positivity from the manufacturers. I think they're worried about how things play out, and I think we need to be realistic. The bikes that needed to be in the pipeline to be sold in the coming months, some of them didn't get built, and some of them got built late. You know, we're looking at the other side of production. They don't build motorcycles in Canada. So yeah, there's opportunity, but there's a lot of cautious conservatism, which our business surprisingly has a fair amount of. So yeah, I think the indicators are positive, but I need to look at most problems in that manner on behalf of the series and the competitors and our fans and all of that. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, we control a lot of media and have a lot of good material. This year it was problematic because I lost my title sponsor, so there weren't the opportunities in terms of budget. And also, and this is very specific to us, a lot of our media staff were in the bubble in Nova Scotia, so they couldn't come to the races. So yeah, it became a little bit more of a get things that have to be done, and some of the niceties that we're starting to get back to doing some of the things we used to do. But yeah, there was a pretty big pause and a bunch of missing bits and pieces throughout the summer of 2020, and I'm looking forward to getting those back and hopefully doing even more. And you know, we are fortunate. We own a great deal of video from the history of the series, so there's some opportunities there to do some creative things. And you know, we're hoping to do more, and we need to do more.
Awesome.
Anything else in the queue there in the Q&A, Stuart?
There's a couple of quick ones here. I'll just comment. Stephen Smarts, he's just asking if there's any thoughts on Colin ever doing a hardcover book. So there's that. And then there's just one other question. If the National Series will be traveling out to Western Canada, if they're looking at any specific racetracks, Rocky Mountain Motorsports or Area 27 in BC.
Okay, so we'll start with Mr. Smart, who was a amateur superbike front runner on a fearsome Katana back in the day. And you know, the book is always an ocean. I've been working on it on and off for 20 years, and we've been close a couple of times, and I'd still like to do it. It's probably now a self-publishing task because the book business isn't what it was when I started on this project. But the book is over half done. I think I need to caution people that this confession of all the crazy stuff that's ever happened to anybody is not going to be in the book, because the problem is a lot of these people are still alive, and everybody wants to hear it about somebody else, but nobody wants to hear it about themselves. So the book that the people really crave, I think, is an immediate. This would be a little more of a photo book. So let's talk about nationals. A year ago, the plan was to go to Area 27 in BC. Beautiful track, one of the nicest tracks in Canada for sure. Brand new facility, don't really hold races there, and I don't think they're particularly concerned with holding races there, which is unfortunate. If we'd gone back out to BC, and the plan was to start 2020 in BC, that was what we were going to do. Then we were going to try and go back to Edmonton again, and we love the club there. There's been some challenges, the club with the venues, and they're working through that. There's hope of another new venue further south in Alberta. Realistically, we had a sponsor who was very interested in spreading the series as wide as we could. That was Mopar, and it was built into the contract every time we had a new contract that if we could do more races in different places, that they would support that. And there's a lot of risk in a first event, and you know, it's tough to do that first one. It's not going to be profitable for anyone. So it was always nice to know that Mopar had our back there. And I don't mean we don't want to go west right now. There aren't possibilities, and it's not a great time for that. But the goal is always to go to as many venues as makes sense. And the last time we were out west, which was in Edmonton 5 years ago, it went really well. We actually, through Brooklyn Cycle Racing and Rob Egan, put together a program to take a lot of the amateur riders out. So we managed to get a lot of people out there at a reasonable price. So we have, you know, new ideas and better ways to do things. And I think the best way to help regional racing is to support regional racing. And if you ever want somebody from Alberta to hit the national series, the way there used to be so many people from Alberta and BC, you've got to bring the series to them first so they get an idea of how things work and, you know, can show off on television, hopefully in front of their home fans on the track they know best, because it's very intimidating to travel east to these tracks that the Eastern guys know so well, and you've never been there, and you're really throwing in at the deep end. And there's a lot of really ugly stories that should probably go in the book about all the people who've traveled east and had things go completely backwards.
Colin, while you're on the subject of racetracks out west, a couple of tracks, and maybe they're not up to standard to run a national. One is the track at Mission. Is that a viable venue? And of course, in 1986, the series ran at Gimli. Is Gimli ever a potential for a round if you got back to doing a Western swing?
It's been a long time since we've spoken to the people at Gimli. I don't know if there's the interest there, and I don't think they have a large group of people, so that makes it hard to do. But you know, we're interested in talking to everybody always. I mean, Gimli would be tough now. It was a track where you had to cross the track, actually drive on the surface of the track to get to the pits in the infield. And these days that would be a very, very difficult situation. And those are the kinds of problems, you know, as time's moved on, and whether it's, you know, generators or tire warmers or easy ups or proper stands, or all the mechanics of how we go racing now are a lot more. The amount of paddock space we take up, the footprint of each race team is so much different for everybody, not just for the top guys, for the whole group. So it's a lot more complicated, and you know, it was fun going to Gimli, and I've been there a number of times, not lately, but I'm not, and I don't want to pick on Gimli. I'm just not sure that they could sustain us at this point. And beyond that, we'll have to see. You know, we've been to Mission, we visited there a few times. They've got a good club. The venue has some challenges, and again, if the venue's not that interested, if it's kind of a here's our track, take it or leave it, it's very difficult to run a national in those circumstances. And you know, we've been out there to look a few times over the years, and we ran some events for Kawasaki out there a few years ago. But I don't know that there's the will to do that. And in BC, I sense, and I'm only there occasionally, that the hope is that there'll be another place. And right now, when it comes to another place, Alberta seems to be the most likely spot.
Let's talk for a moment before we leave the actual racetracks. The situation in Quebec with the closure of Saint Eustache. What I know, last year you had, or this year you had, ICAR penciled in. Can we look at a return to ICAR perhaps in 2022, or is that track off the schedule? And then the other one, of course, is Mont Tremblant. Will we ever see the series back there?
So where ICAR is concerned, the plan was to go there in 2020. They were making some changes to the facility. We were going to have a look and see how the installation would work there. In the end, that nothing happened, and they were in a bubble, but there were a lot of very specific rules about travel. They're not interested in conducting the event as a rental period. They want to do it as a spectator event, and we're optimistic because there's location just outside of Montreal we think could get a good party atmosphere. We'd like to do that in Montreal. So we'll have to wait and see. You know, it's possible next year's 5th race could be ICAR, but that's not based on a plan. That's based on health and safety and those kinds of things. And then getting out there to figure out how to configure the track and have some of the top guys go and look at it and work through. The track is quite a bit different than the last time we went there. And, you know, people don't know ICAR as the former international airport. So the surface we raced on there is poured concrete slabs. So you know, it works okay, but it's got its own set of challenges. As far as Tremblant goes, Tremblant is not, in my words, a particularly motorcycle friendly place. And they've got, again, as I alluded to with other places, a bit of a take it or leave it view of participating at their track. So I don't foresee Tremblant on my watch, because I just think it's a difficult venue to set up and make work for motorcycles. And it's a track that people love, but it's a really, really difficult track to stage races at. And, you know, at CTMP and at Calabogie, which are similar kinds of places, there's a fair amount of cooperation from the track, which makes it a lot easier and a lot less worrisome. Tremblant is a tough one. We had a rough history in a number of ways in Tremblant. And I think it's great to love to ride at a place, but riding at a place, even track days, is not racing nationals. Racing nationals, you know, it's a fairly serious thing. We're basically in the lap time business. We're suggesting that you join us for the nationals, and if you're comfortable riding hard, this is a place to work on that. You know, you practice only with your guys on similar bikes in your group. If you're buying track time, national is not the most effective way to buy your track time. It's a different situation, and it doesn't really compare to a lot of the other things that are going on. And that doesn't make it better or worse, but it makes it complicated in terms of the venues, because we have to do a good job in terms of installation.
Stuart, I think we've got a couple of more questions there for Colin.
We do, Pat. I'll just pull up my screen here. Michael Taylor's written in, what can you tell us do you think the series needs? Is it more money, more staff, more competitors?
I think we'd like to have all those things, and they all go together to a certain degree. I think that trying to find a way to expand the reach in terms of the visibility of the series is always the goal. And at one point, the way the market worked, we were doing fairly well. I don't think we're as strong as we used to be that way. And I think that would be an important first step. I think, you know, we've got a reasonably loyal group of people, and the numbers have come up steadily, if not quickly, for a few years now. So that part of things isn't bad. And obviously, if you suddenly offered 10 times as much prize money, that would probably bring a few more riders out. But you know, even if we did that, we wouldn't suddenly have 10 more Jordan Zokes, right? You got to develop the talent. And we have somebody like, you know, Thomas Kazaz. He first raced the CBR 125 series when he was quite young, and now he has been on the podium in Pro Superbike. So we're proud of those kinds of things. But I think, you know, the next step would be great to have somebody running on a team full time in the United States. They run on the same spec Dunlops that we do. We have experience with the configuration. Our rules are not super different, although their super bikes are a fair bit more sophisticated than our super bikes. Ours are more like European super stock. But yeah, I think more visibility, sending a few riders south. You know, when I think of Michael, I think about a large group of Canadians who raced seriously in the United States in the privateer era, and some of them did quite well and attracted a lot of attention. Michael came very close to getting a factory ride, and Miguel and Steve and Pascal did get factory rides. So you know, those were the good days of the series. And people forget too, we sent a lot of mechanics and tuners down there. So there was a really strong Canadian presence, but the opportunities down there are far fewer now, just the way they're far fewer in Canada. So it's a challenge, but yeah, there's lots of things we could do with more people, more bikes, and more money.
That's awesome. I guess along those lines, Colin, with what Tony Sharpless is doing in her supersonic school in terms of cultivating talent, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, anything that's getting people involved is good down the road, right? There's no telling where today's 10-year-old in an O'Valley is, you know, 10 years from now, a pro superbike competitor. You know, the more people we load in regionally or on different classes, you know, we're somewhat restricted in age because of insurance guidelines these days, which is tough when, you know, guys are eligible to race in Europe in MotoGP and they're not eligible to race in CSBK in the early classes. So you know, anything that's getting new people involved and building enthusiasm and providing a focal point, you know, I think what Tony wants to do is great, and eventually, you know, we'll have, hopefully, and I think she's going to announce it soon, an outdoor series. Hopefully the final event would be a crossover that we could involve it with the CSBK round, and eventually an indoor series in the winter. And we would probably put a little focus on that because it'd be fun to have a few of our superbike guys do a little bit of riding and have something to talk about in the winter when there's so little going on. So yeah, whether it's you know, regional racing at any of the venues across Canada, or or venues that aren't national. I think it's all good, and it's all motorcycling, and it's all enthusiasm, and anything that keeps people excited and interested, particularly during the winter. You know, think about this year. You know, I complain all the time I'm sick of bike shows, but I have a hunch I'm going to be really missing them over the course of this winter because they've been a focal point in how we plan things, and it's going to be a quiet winter.
Yeah. Colin, on the schedule, notably missing is a round at Shannonville, which has been a fixture for 40 years until this year. What's the situation with Shannonville, and why isn't it one of the rounds on the schedule?
Well, Shannonville has staged more Canadian Superbike Nationals than any other venue, and at various times it's been home for a lot of reasons. You know, 40 years ago, Pat and I worked there at the start of race, right, which at the time was a pretty significant development in terms of Canadian motorcycle racing and had a far-reaching effect in all kinds of ways. So yeah, we'd like to, you know, be at Shannonville if and when the opportunity presents itself. I like to think it's a matter of timing, and we'll see what's possible. You know, we had some plans in 2020 at Shannonville. The hope was to do something on the actual 40th anniversary of the first Superbike race at Shannonville, the first national. And you know, next year's our 41st anniversary, and you know, eventually we'd like to come around and do some of the things that we had planned in 2020 that we couldn't do. Like we had some pretty ambitious notions of things to do at ICAR for the Quebec market, which I think would have been fun. We were going to have a vintage bike show and, you know, just do some special things. And it's always nice to do those. But of course, those are all about enhancing the spectator experience. You know, we talked to the VRA and had some ideas there, and we appreciate what those guys are doing and would like to co-op, particularly in terms of things that are our history. You know, some of the classes in the VRA fit in specifically to classes that developed through CSBK and our early years. So yeah, more of all of that stuff would be good, and never say never, but you know, at the moment in 2021, we're not scheduled to go to Shannonville.
Well, this will segue into my next question. In addition to the amateur and pro sport bike and superbike classes and lightweight sport bike that you run, comment on these three potential classes down the road. One would be some kind of a vintage superbike class based on superbikes of the 80s, perhaps. The King of the Bagger class that we saw Moto America debut at Laguna Seca. And the other one that I think is a little bit further down the road, motorcycle racing, electric bikes that actually ran at Mosport, Canadian Tire Motorsport Park a number of years ago, and you were there for that. Where do you see motorcycle racing in the series, and when would that be a possibility?
Well, if you'd asked me 15 years ago, I think I would have said we'd be doing it by now. 10 years ago, we went way out of our way with some help from Miles at CTMP to have one of those rounds, arguably probably a little too soon because they were barely up and running. We were, I think, the second place in North America after Elkhart Lake to hold a round. And we didn't have a lot of riders and bikes, and they were, I don't know if you remember, they couldn't even do a cool-off lap because of the capacity of their batteries. They were stopping at turn 2 at Mosport and then waiting as a group to ride back the reverse direction, which is not something we like to do. So you know, electric bikes I think are very significant in the future. What surprises me specifically is by now I would have guessed we'd have some kind of spec series for that. I think that's a great idea in terms of showcasing those bikes, and hopefully not necessarily the, you know, in Europe they're arguably the e-bike is a bit of a spec series, but they're very high spec, they're very expensive. I'd be more interested in running something a little more affordable. And of course, spec series to me implies stock, so you retain the costs as best you can. So yeah, e-bikes I think are important, and I would, the sooner we could do something in that area, particularly with the spec series, the better. In terms of all out racing e-bikes, that hasn't developed as fast as expected. You know, the Isle of Man, we're going to sit that out in 2020 to wait to get more product available for people to race. They didn't have very big grids, and they were very short races because of, you know, the Isle of Man is probably the worst track you could ever pick for electric bikes. But, you know, long term, I think our future could be nothing but electric bikes. I don't mean next year, I mean way down the road. And as with so many things, I would have expected they'd be more a part of things now than they are. But one or two changes and one or two business shifts, and if one of the Japanese manufacturers starts making a sporty electric bike, that will change everything quickly.
And what about baggers and vintage superbike?
So baggers, you know, I was involved in a project with baggers over a decade ago when I was working in the United States, and there was a lot of interest back then. Of course, the market was stronger. In Canada, I just don't know that there's the interest or the demand, and I think that, you know, we're arguably in most ways 1/10 of the marketplace, and I think you'd really, really have to beat the bushes to get that. Now, having said that, if they have a bagger series that's up and running in the States, to have a round of that would be.
Did we lose Colin there? We'll give him a few seconds here to see if he comes back, Stuart. While we're waiting for that, Stuart, what are the other couple of questions we had for Colin?
Well, we just had a couple of comments with regard to whether or not there would be an increase in entry fees. And just the question is, how is a regional series such as SOAR able to have 13-year-old racers, but we can't at the national level? I know Colin had touched on the insurance issue as being a reason why. He's still there.
Yeah, and I think we just lost him.
Now he's gone.
Okay. We want to say a thank you to Colin for coming on board and talking about the CSBK National Series. Stuart, have we got anything else there in terms of questions, comments before we wrap it up?
Those were the last two, and then we just had Pete Swedish had commented in earlier actually that there was one other conflict we didn't acknowledge, and that was Pittsburgh and CTMP for Moto America and the CSBK series.
Yeah,
but
yeah, we're primarily focusing on what was happening here in Ontario. There are a few conflicts, but as we said off the top, no shortage of races. There are 3 regional series plus the CSBK National Series, with at least 3 of those races here in Ontario, possibly a 4th event with doubleheader superbikes happening. Stuart, as an ex-racer, your thoughts on what we heard tonight from Colin Fraser and the CSBK 2021 schedule?
well, I think it's encouraging. It looks like they've got a bunch of good venues, some venues where they've been at before, and obviously in conjunction with Pro 6, reestablishing Calabogie as it seems like it's a really high-class facility. And I know a lot of the track day guys that go rave, and they sort of make a vacation out of always going. So hopefully they can build a foundation with that. Grand Bends, I always think, is a great event. It's in a great little beach town. It's a great place to get away to for the weekend, and I think it's a fun track to ride at. It is too bad. I think just because of the history of the series, and I guess I'm partial to it, but I'd love to see Shannonville back in the mix, because it seems strange not having a national round at a venue like Shannonville.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and hopefully they can somehow find a way to host one of the national rounds, if not next year, certainly in 2022, because as we said, no track has hosted more national rounds than Shannonville. And of course, we're also looking forward to the day when the series can have its traditional Western swing, when we used to run at Race City in Calgary and Westwood in Vancouver. Both of those racetracks, of course, long since closed, and not a whole lot of choice in terms of other venues out west where you can run. So Stuart, World Superbike wrapped up, MotoGP. I will give a shout out to Henry Degas, who's down there in South Florida. Probably the final road race, none of the Canadian riders can get there, is the American Sport Bike Racing Association finale and the Championship Cup Series race that's going to happen on the December 5th and 6th weekend at Homestead. And that'll cap off the season pretty much for everybody. And we also want to mention to all of our American friends who are on board tonight, Pete and Carol, Henry Degas, as well as Bob Coy. We wish them all a very happy Thanksgiving. Again, would like to thank Colin Fraser, and for a short while, Pat Barnes and Sheena and Sandy Noche for hopping on board tonight's edition of Track Announcer's Notebook. Stuart, final thoughts, and then we'll put a wrap on it.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. Again, just want to also thank Colin and everybody who joined the show tonight. I thought there was a lot of great conversation, and hopefully we can keep it going through the winter, because I think the series can build some momentum, or motorcycle racing in general can. And I think there's a lot of opportunity, and hopefully we can see it grow. And without bike shows in place, this could be a great platform to sort of address all of the challenges and maybe ways to overcome them. But other than that, go to the YouTube channel, the Track Announcer's Notebook, and subscribe.
Okay, all the past shows and interviews are there as well. So on behalf of my co-host and producer, Stuart Nodell, for our guest, Colin Fraser, and for all of those who joined us tonight, have a pleasant week. We'll see you back here next Monday night at 8 p.m. Eastern on Track Announcer's Notebook. Be safe. And again, happy Thanksgiving to those of us south of the border. Good night.